Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. Um, we might get started today, and it's a little bit of a different format today. As you can see, we're sitting here on stage, and I'm going to, with pleasure, introduce Anu Kumar in a moment. But first, I'll note who I am. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Vicky McInnes. I'm the head of the Research Masters program here at the VCA, as well as currently acting head of the art school, which has been a complete joy just for another week or so. I want to begin by acknowledging where we're all gathered here today. As we know, we're on unceded Aboriginal lands, and these are Yalukit Willen lands, the Kulin Nation lands, and I want to acknowledge my thanks, my respect, my gratitude to the traditional custodians, and through them to all First Nations people here in the room, in Zoomland and beyond. And just remind ourselves of the privilege it is to be here and the responsibility also when we gather on these unceded lands. It's unusual for me to be here. Normally David Sequeira would be introducing our esteemed guests. And we're also mixing it up a little bit today. We're having more of a kind of conversational mode rather than a stand-up lecture presentation. So we warmly encourage you to pitch in as well as we go. If there are questions or observations that emerge out of the conversation, please feel free to, throw your hand up into the air or shout out at any time. It's nice to have a little bit of informality, I think. Anu can introduce what's going on behind us in a moment, but first I'd like to introduce Anu to you all. Those of you who have been to see the exhibition Objects and Imagination at the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery will have seen the glorious works of Anu's in the exhibition, and we'll talk a little bit about some of them, but by means of introduction, Anu Kumar is a photographic artist living and working in Naarm. She works primarily with medium format photography, and I'd love to get into some of the whys and wherefores of that as well. Frequently using her practice as a way to understand her identity, both as a woman born in India and raised in Australia, and then I guess interrogating the themes of displacement and diaspora from a very personal perspective. Anu's photographic observations of everyday life in her hometown of Kavinagar in the northwestern city of Ghaziabad, which is near Delhi, we'll talk about that as well, acknowledge the deep, that's working, the deep strength of familial ties unfractured by migration, the preservation of inherited gestures and traditions, and the importance of archiving as a means of safeguarding personal and collective histories. Be good to unpack those as well, and the ongoing archive that you're establishing. Anu's work was shown in Melbourne now at the NGV, and if we could only take time, contemporary Australian photography at the National Portrait Gallery in Canberra. Her photography has been published by the New York Times and by Vogue Italia, and the first volume of photographs, which is kind of flicking through behind us on the screen, was published in 2022 by Perimeter Editions, with a second volume in preparation. And as I mentioned, the work is currently, well, an excerpt of the work is currently showing in the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery. So maybe we'll begin, Anu, with talking about home and the title of the series of works that are currently showing in the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery, GAR, which is a subset of the ongoing archive. Could you talk a little bit about what home means to you? A big question, or many home? Yeah.
So Home, which is the title of my book that I did with Perimeter, it's called Go, which is home in Hindi. It's interesting because, I was born there and then raised here. So I've always had this I was one, so it was quite young, but like most, immigrant families, like we used to go back every 2 years. So it was always kind of like I had this second home and then my first home and then which one my first and which one was my second. It kind of got muddled all the way. But yeah, I was really kind of disassociated from that kind of home for a really long time. Like, you know, with the kind of pursuit of assimilation, I just ignored that side of myself. And yeah, so it didn't really feel like home. It just felt like a bit of an obligation that I had to go back. And then when I was 19, 20, I went back on my own. And then I really felt like this sense of like belonging there and this kind of feeling that I needed to kind of find my home there as well. And that was what my pursuit was, kind of really strengthening that sense of home there. But yeah, I know it's funny because I always thought that like it's such a struggle to be from two places because you never really belong anywhere. But like lately, it's been such a feeling of gratitude and privilege to have two homes, two places that like, you know, I have an actual home there with family there, and I have an actual home here with family and community here. It's just I feel very lucky.
Um, Thanks. That I mean, that idea of gratitude is something that maybe we'll park and come back to as well, because I think that's really generative. But I wonder, is the same the case for language as well? That do you move between two languages, or and I guess I'm thinking about that in terms of the connection to place. The work is titled Gar, and it's, I mean, you chose a Hindi word to use. Is language one of the kind of places that you move between and among as well?
Yeah, so it's language is such a hard thing for me because I speak Hindi, kind of broken Hindi. I can't write it. I can't, um, you know, engage in political discussions in Hindi or anything. It's mainly just like light conversational stuff. But I think that's a lot actually dictated the design of this book as well. Like if you can't see it now, but the front cover it's got Gar written in Hindi and then in English, and they're overlapping in a way. And there's this kind of like, yeah, that they're both kind of within me in a certain way. And then the Hindi is like a bit more translucent, and then even in the text that's written, the text in the book is a letter that my mum wrote to my grandparents when we'd moved to Australia. She was talking about how she misses home and what's going on. And so that's written in Hindi, and I sat with my cousin and he translated it all for me. He spoke in Hindi, he read it in Hindi, and I understood. And so, you know, even with the language, how it was presented in the book, we had it written in English. And this is such a kind of like nerdy design thing, but Narelle did this and it's so genius. But she wrote in Hindi on the other side, and the paper is a little bit like thin, so you could kind of there's a bit of see-through from both sides. So they're both kind of like embedded within each other. Yeah.
She is a genius. We're talking about Narelle Brewer, who is the designer for Perimeter. Thinking, I guess, about revisiting and, as you said, that shift from the visitation, and I guess most of us or many of us can relate to that idea of family visits being an obligation to some extent, but then that moment where it changed for you, and you talked about that being in your 20s, where I guess the yeah the both the I guess the impetus, but also the your relationship to the place changed. And I'm interested in the time in relation to that, and thinking, um, you know, rather than quick visits, you spent a prolonged period of time, and what that opened up for you, and particularly in relation to photography, I guess. And I know you work in mainly in medium format photography, and there's and so on film, you know, there's a certain number of images you take on a film, and you have to. Yeah, I'm interested in the time and the slowness and the decision making about that, I guess.
Yeah, so actually this body of work, Go, which is actually still continuing now, took 10 years to make. And I think it's like important to note just how long it takes to make a body of work like this. And, you know, behind, I think there's maybe 70 images in this book, but there's probably like 400 or 500 images that no one's ever seen and, you know, doesn't make the cut. It does take a lot of time, but I'm only interested in work that takes time. I would go back to India every year and take like maybe 2 or 3 months. And then I never put too much pressure on myself to be like taking images. I'm not a hustler. I'm really not. I go, and I think it feels, because it's a collaboration with my family. And I feel like, you know, we spend time with each other, we get to be in each other's space, and then it comes out about so organically. Um, and that's just how I make my work. I've never really questioned it too much. It's just felt natural for me. And I don't want to put my family in a position where they feel like they're always being photographed, or they're always kind of, I'm here for that reason, you know? In terms of using medium format photography and not digital, I found I started using medium format photography when I was at uni. I studied at RMIT about like 12 years ago. And I found when I was shooting digitally, I have nothing against it. I just was overshooting, and it just took me out of it, and it made me really anxious. And
By overshooting, can you
yeah,
open it up a bit more?
yeah, so like,
So,
mm, yeah, it was more just like if I saw something that I felt like I wanted to capture, I would just go too hard. I feel like taking like 50 images of the one thing. And then I just kind of couldn't quite figure out what was the moment, and would really agonize over like which one of the five. And with film, I just felt like there was like an allowance for like a magic that I had no control over as well. There just felt like yeah, I allowed it to be what it was going to be. And I know I liked being surprised by it as well. There's also like a gap. I would take photos in India, and then I'd, you know, beg airport security to not put them through the scanners and all of that. And then finally, when I'd get them back, I never developed them straight away. I would sit on them for a while. And then sometimes I would see an image like a year after I took it. And I liked the space of that. Like, and it would be like, oh, that's not what I pictured it to be. And it would be different. It might be worse, it might be better, it might be just different. But I don't know, I enjoyed that kind of the time of that. You know, I think maybe the immediacy didn't really work with what I was trying to do.
it's certainly in terms of, I guess, memory that adds a whole other layer of, you know, tension to the work as well. That you you seeing the images potentially a year after shooting the memories of those places and those times is already at a distance. I mean, it's at a distance straight away, but you know that's exacerbated. But in terms of that, I know that over that time you've lost family members as well, or things change, and there's, as well as the, I guess, self-reflection and the nostalgia. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about nostalgia, but I mean, there's, you know, this personal grief that you're attenuating and dealing with in the work. I mean, are you happy to talk a little bit about that, about some of the loss that is transmitted through the work?
Yeah, so when I made this book, all of the members in it were still alive. And then since then, I've lost my grandfather and my uncle. Actually, my grandfather did pass away whilst making this. And funnily enough, I never photographed him. And actually, the second book that I'm making is kind of like a portrait of him without actually having a portrait of him in it. And it kind of links us to the, you know, the exhibition that's on now, this kind of idea that objects can like still have a soul that lingers within it. And yeah, I think that my work is kind of progressing towards that, like this like grief and loss. But yeah, just the objects that people leave behind. And that home was actually built by my grandfather. So he still feels like he's there in a certain way. So I don't know, I really feel like objects possess that kind of, I don't know, soul. And yeah, I'm not looking for, kind of have to look forward to like exploring that, but it's hard. It's hard work. But it's important work for me and my family.
Thanks. I know actually last week, Marina Barini gave a talk about her work, both in the exhibition and beyond. And she talked about, I guess, that, that similar notion of objects holding both memory. She didn't mention the word soul, but kind of talked around it a lot in terms of ancestors and archives being a place where things are held necessarily, but also people. And this work is an ongoing body of an archive of the overarching title. Sorry, remind me an archive of home. Thank you. You mentioned I read somewhere, and we were just talking a little bit about this earlier, that you thought you had finished with that work at a certain point, and it was a really wonderful Indian artist, Andy Singh, who suggested to you, actually, this work is not done. This is ongoing and potentially a life's work. Could you talk a little bit about that, about the, I guess, the archive, the living archive, the artist archive?
Yeah, just to kind of elaborate as well, I'd given my book to my like favorite artist of all time. And I said to her, I was like at a loss for what to do now because I've spent 10 years making this and I don't know what to do. It's just I I don't know how to follow this up. It's kind of the whole like second album type thing. And yeah, and she was like, it's well, only you can tell the story. And if you want to keep taking photos, you should keep taking photos. It's not done. And she's like a genius archivist of her own life. So I kind of took a page out of her book and was like, yeah, it really wasn't done. And I kind of stopped looking at it as like separate bodies of work and more like this continuous archive, essentially. And not just me doing it because it is a collaboration at the end of the day. It's like there's photographs in my book and in my works that are like photos that my grandfather took and letters that my mom wrote and objects and these kinds of things. So it doesn't feel like this linear thing either. It just feels like everything is just pieced together in a certain way. There's old photographs, there's new things that are taken. There's some like photographs that are going to be in the new book that I took like 7 years ago, and it all feels like kind of punctuations along the way. And each time I make something, whether it be an exhibition or a book, it's just what I'm feeling right now and reflecting on the whole archive in that one moment. So it could be from 50 years ago, I use works, or it could be just, from now, or, it's all kind of drawing from the same archive.
I love the fact that the text here is a letter that your mum wrote 30 years or more than 30 years ago, maybe. Was that, I mean, clearly it was, I mean, I assume it was in consultation with her. Did she go back into that letter at all? Because I was just thinking about what you said about, this isn't a linear narrative at all. It's, I guess it's looking at these moments in your past, your family's past, but in the present moment and picking, well, bringing certain things into focus that aren't necessarily a linear history. Did did your mum go back into the letter, or was it verbatim what she wrote at the time? Because I guess I'm interested in her feelings about that letter, given, the time that's passed. sorry, it's going a little bit off track from the images themselves, but I'm just thinking about the way that memory exists in the present, I guess.
Yeah, the letter it's a pretty emotional letter. Obviously, I spoke to her about it, if I could use it. And then she read it and she was just kind of like a bit shocked at how maybe sad she was at that time. I mean, it's a big thing to leave your motherland and make a new home. But, when she reflects on our time in Australia, she's very like proud that she did it and she's very happy here and she's very successful here. So she doesn't look back and regret anything. But I think she kind of remembered that, oh, it was really hard and like seeing her words. It was the letter was a lot longer than what we ended up using, but yeah, it was yeah, she cried and she cries every time she sees something of mine. The last show that we had I had at Hayden's gallery, she saw that and actually our house is potentially maybe going to be sold and um she kind of saw the show and she was like, I let's try and save it and keep it. So I think it is important. But yeah, it's hard because it's more her life than it is mine sometimes. She's in the book and like old photographs of her and everything. But yeah, it's an emotional journey and it's sometimes I feel conflicted about it, like not conflicted about making it, but conflicted about showing it. It's hard to kind of justify it sometimes because it's so personal and it's not just me, it's all of them. So yeah, it's a constant tension I have to like deal with and ask my parent like my family about it all the time.
Exactly, not just your stories. And I guess, that's a condition or a set of tensions that a lot of artists necessarily, grapple with in their practices. You mentioned you've never photographed your grandfather, but you have photographed your mother. Do you take photos here, or is this archive of home purely located in India?
Yeah, this is all taken in India. I think it felt like the home in India really anchored it. It was because, it was built and designed by my grandfather. My family still lived there. That's where I started making it. And I don't know, it's probably where I feel most inspired right now, but doesn't mean that it might not expand to here at one point. But yeah, I think I like making work that has the grounding of like a sense of place and having like an anchor or a common thread like that is really it helps like guide me a lot. Otherwise, it just feels like the possibilities are a bit too endless for me.
It's clearly still giving a lot to you, and I mean, there's still a lot of work to do, clearly. I'm just wondering if maybe that's a good time to open up for some questions or thoughts from anyone in the audience. Karen.
Excellent. I just want to know, maybe if you can talk about why you went into photography and like doing this, looking and searching for that idea of place and belonging through that medium, and like how do you feel about that, or have you thought about that, or how did you get there?
Yeah, it's actually because I was pretty like academic as like when I first left school, I like studied occupational therapy and wasn't really like an artist in any sense of the word, but I was always like an arty kid, and that was just kind of pushed a little bit because my parents are Indian and all that. And yeah, so photography was kind of like this miracle thing where I was just like, it felt like the most accessible way to, you know, access that side of myself without having done any actual formal training at that time. I was just like, it felt exciting and easy for me to express myself. And I don't know, there's something about photography, like even now, there's like this feeling I get that when I take photos, but I don't really know what it is that interests me. I just kind of like let my intuition guide me. And I feel like photography is such a good medium for that. Like I'll go and take like 50 images and then find a pattern that I'm just like, why am I taking all these images of draped fabric again and again and again? And I find that I can make sense of what I'm thinking and feeling through the photos that I take rather than the other way around. Like I think something about, you know, putting paint to canvas seems so intimidating to me because I just don't know what I'm wanting to say. But there's something about photography that tells me before I know. It like surpasses my cognition.
It's kind of interesting because because I remember seeing these pictures did you show me?
CCP?
Yeah, so I saw the show. So thinking that there's 5,000 and thinking that it's done in reverse, which is what the images tell you what to do, but the images seem so specifically composed. And when I think about my romanticized idea of it, which I've never been, so I don't want to make, but that it's loud and that it's bustling, that there's heaps of people, these images are particularly quiet and still. I was just wondering if you could talk about, once you've got the 5,000 pictures, how do you, like you just said, you're going to find patterns, but what are some of the choices that you make?
Well, also just with, you know, my images being like still and quiet, that's just kind of how I always saw India, because obviously Delhi's nuts, but my hometown is like half an hour away from Delhi. It's just like quite suburban and really quiet. And yeah, there's a lot of people and there's color, but it's just, it has a softness, and obviously the pollution provides like a little bit of like a haze to everything. But yeah, the in terms of like getting the volume down, there wasn't 5,000, there was probably like 500, which makes it a little bit easier. But I think when I started taking the images, there was a lot of like street images and those kinds of things before I knew what I wanted to do and what I wanted to say. And then when I kind of distilled it to, oh, I want it to be about my family and my home, it really kind of dictated what was in it and what wasn't. There's still images that I like treasure and I love that didn't make it into the book, but it's only because it didn't, you know, contribute to that storytelling of like my home. But yeah, in terms of like finding commonalities, there was, you know, when you're making a book, it's like you try not to have too much repetition of like the same type of images. So it was like interesting grouping, like, okay, these are all the images of fabric, and these are all the images with silver, and these are all the images of my nani and all of that. And then finding the best images of those groups and then piecing it together. Yeah, but I mean, seeing the commonalities really taught me a lot about what I was drawn to. So it was like a good exercise anyway, even if the images didn't make it into the book.
And talking about, it sounds like your process is very intuitive, but in terms of that selection and sequence, photographs, and whether there's also an undertone narrative that, or either if you put simply mindedly expressing, you know, it's the first photograph in these questions. Presumably your parents, grandparents, grandparents, yeah. And so whether the narrative, whether it's considered that it is a narrative of your life with generational layers, but very much from your perspective, or whether you are interested in sort of trying to communicate the different individual members' perspectives through that selection and sequence. Which I think I've been this convoluted question, but I'm just interested in the flow, maybe the generational flow and the sequential flow in publication.
Yeah, it was really hard to sequence it actually, and because there were so many, and just to kind of get a structure. But like, you know, starting the book with my grandparents felt like such an obvious choice because, you know, they are the one that gave birth to all of this that's going to follow, you know. So it was important to kind of pepper it with those kinds of like moments, and the rhythm is so important of like a book. You know, you have to have these like soft moments or these things that are just like it was funny. My publisher, Dan and Justine at Perimeter, they kept being like, you got too many banging picks. You got to have like these soft, kind of not as banging picks in the middle. And it is about creating that kind of rhythm. It's like, you know, you have like a couple of like more quiet, less like intense images that lead up to like a bang and pick. And then you kind of, it's like playful, you know, you have to have like moments and unexpected moments, so it can't be like the same kind of rhythm again. And it's fun to play with that, just being like highlighting what are my favorite images, what are their favorite images, and then kind of pacing them in such a way that works. But it's the possibilities are endless. You can have like 70 images and make like, you know, 70 completely different books. And it's hard to make decisions when you're like doing it, but it is fun. Like I really enjoy that process of sequence. It's like there's so much that is in the edit. It's so important.
Speaking about sort of coming to terms with the two, or appreciating the two homes that you live mainly here. But have you thought about, can you see yourself working with images of home in Australia?
Yeah, that's a good question, and a question I've been asking myself a lot. I mean, I'm currently making this body of work because it feels like necessary for now. My nanny is like 96 and the home might go any day, like day now. So it's important for me to do that work now. But I recently got married and me and my partner bought a house, and I'm now thinking about, you know, creating my own archive within the new home that we're building together, you know. So it's like I'm excited about that prospect, and I don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's something that I really want to do because this is my home, and I want to be able to make work here. That's like something that's important to me in the future.
Yes, I was just going to ask about the performance of the hand and so forth. You hear them with that, and is it a family member's hands because of the way they're caressing the pages?
Uh, no, it's actually someone from Europe who has a bookshop, and he recorded this and thankfully allowed me to use it. But you're right, he's taking a lot of care in turning the pages. But you know what? That's a good idea. I should actually get a family member to do this and then record it so I can put it on my website.
Can I just ask you a question about, I mean, the difference between, I guess, making books and making exhibitions? And I was just thinking when you were talking about Dan and Justine and the, you know, the rhythm and the banging picks, and thinking about your show at Hayden's, which was focused on crockery. And is that right? Yeah. But I guess that what the rhythm of an exhibition allows in relation to, you know, the rhythm of a book in terms of both intimate engagement with it, but of maybe allowing things to open up and expand in different ways in an exhibition.
Yeah, so as you can see in my book, all the images are the same size. And in the show with Hayden's, like, and also other shows that I've done, yeah, including here, I've always played with size. So having like small kind of 30 by 30 prints and then a meter by meter and then somewhere in between. And I had a show at the CCP like a few years ago, and I noticed just from putting them up how people moved and observed the images. They would like walk further back to see the big images, and then you would watch them kind of like move back and forth. And I kind of liked that, like almost dictating how people move within the space. It felt like an interesting thing to explore. But yeah, I like the idea of like blowing up big, as in like small little soft in between moments into something like big. So you're just like contemplating this like, you know, small moment in this very large way. But yeah, I've interested in exhibitions now. I feel like I've only just like dipped my toe in it, but I'd like to play a bit more with the space and how people move within the space and observe things. Because I also had little shelves and little objects placed on them. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further or questions or thoughts? No? Oh, yes.
Yeah, good question. I like a square because it's one less decision to make. I think for me, it feels balanced. And I think I have a tendency to kind of overcomplicate things. So the simplicity of the square really works for me. And I found a lot of photographers don't like it because they find it too simple and that there's not enough variation, but I think it suits me perfectly.
In your photographs?
No. I did take a self-portrait last time I was in India, but it's not going to be in the book. It's just going to be for, promotional reasons.
We'll leave it there, Anu. Thank you so much. And as I said, I warmly urge you, if you haven't already seen Anu's work in the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery, to pay a visit. They're very luminous in the gallery, and there's some really lovely conversations going on with other works. But please join me in thanking Anu for her time today.